which is on Zoom. Questions will be read and answered at the end of the webinar. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and we're now going to turn this over to Dr. Huntington.
Dr. Huntington, you are still muted.
That will make a difference. Thank you for that. So, thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Megan, for the introduction, and thank you to the Indiana Thoroughbred Alliance for the inviting me to speak about broodmare nutrition and feeding. It's summer morning here in Melbourne, Australia. I've been up in Sydney the last couple of days at the lead up to the inspection times at one of the yearling sales, so the classic sale in Sydney. So had a good look at some yearlings. But here we are talking about mares, and I guess it's timely given you're about the breeding sheds are about to open, and hopefully you have some foals on the ground and some coming in the next, some nice foals coming in the next few months. So firstly, here we go. Brief introduction to Kentucky Equine Research, and we provide this combination of research, consultation, and targeted nutrition. So we think the research is really important. We think the knowledge that we can provide you, we think we're really knowledge leaders in world knowledge leaders in equine nutrition, and we think that knowledge that we can get from our research or other people's research that we document on Equinews can really help you raise healthier and more productive young horses. We've got 2 research farms in the US, and we've also obviously got a base in Australia in Melbourne. So our original Kentucky farm and a new one in Florida, which is a performance centre. So we can do great research on horses that are either not being exercised out on pasture, stabled, or are performing, and that really allows us to dig deeply into some of the problems and some of the issues that relate to equine nutrition. We've been doing it for a long time, and one of the great tools we've had is this horse nappy, or horse diaper, I should say, on the bottom of the screen, which was actually invented in Melbourne, and that enables us to do some really great digestibility studies and to figure out how well horses digest certain feeds. We also use treadmills, which enable us to actually look at the impact of nutrition on an exercising horse at various feeds, and we've got a racetrack down in Florida, so we can do it at racing under racing conditions. That's really is a big advantage. We work with feed manufacturers around the world, and so we've got a number in North America, Europe, throughout Asia, and Australasia, and that helps us work with their feed and get our knowledge out to the horse owner. Some of the resources we have for you are really valuable, including Equinews, including Microseed, which is our nutritional calculator or ration evaluator, Clockit, great for exercising horses as a tool to look at workload and relationship to heart rate and so on, and also have GrowTrack, which is not listed here, but is a fantastic tool for monitoring and reviewing growth in young horses, and I really urge you to have a look at that. And now that comes can come free with feed from one of our partners, so it's a great software application, GrowTrack. So, broodmare nutrition, and feeding, and I've got the title nutrition, but I mean nutrition and feeding here because the two go hand in hand, and it's obviously vital for fertility and productivity. And I think one of the key areas is what happens with the pregnant mare in the second half of pregnancy, because that can make a difference in both the health of the mare, but also the nutrition of the mare can make a difference to the health and growth of a foal and the performance throughout its life. So you can have some really long-term effects from poor nutrition at that time, and or conversely good nutrition. Obviously, when you're trying to get mares in foal, nutrition is important to ensure optimum fertility. Horses aren't selected for fertility, so sometimes we're battling a little bit. They're selected for other things, particularly thoroughbreds. So getting that nutrition right and getting particularly the energy balance right is really important here. And then the feeding of the mare will influence how well the foal grows and development, and perhaps some of the wastage issues around developmental orthopedic disease. So one of the key things here is body weight and condition. And I think there's sometimes a sort of difference between what a mare owner might want and what's really good for the mare. So there are some mare owner perceptions, particularly people who don't manage the mares themselves, but might own them and on someone else's farm, and they want sort of fat mares that look like they're ready to go into the show ring, all shiny and glossy. But in fact, they don't need to be that heavy. And sometimes when they're too heavy, that's detrimental to their productivity or potentially increases the risk of wastage. So mares really benefit straight line nutrition, and whilst flushing may be useful in other animals such as sheep, flushing being getting them a little skinny and then putting weight on them when you're mating, mares don't need that. So there's no benefit in taking weight off mares, off dry mares or empty mares, and then trying to put it back on them before you start breeding. So you're really wanting to avoid large weight losses and large weight gains. So some of the consequences of underfeeding, there's a number of them, but it can involve fertility, growth rate. Obviously, if you're looking at young horses, if you underfeed certain minerals or more developmental orthopedic disease, and certainly if you're selling young horses at yearling sales or weanling sales, then you'll have a lower value. So they won't make the money. On the other hand, there's probably more consequences from overfeeding, and there's more risk to health and welfare. So the overfed mare is going to gain weight, get fat, usually cost you more, so that's not so good. You can get a number of metabolic issues, including insulin dysregulation that could lead to laminitis, and that's the particular issue for the late pregnant mare. We have an increased risk of colic and developmental orthopedic disease and some long-term impact. So it's getting that balance right that's really important. I think one of the most useful things that we have in terms of feeding horses on the breeding farm is grass. And this phrase, Dr. Green, was coined by a New Zealand veterinarian, Twink Allen, who was in Newmarket as a reproductive specialist for a long time. And I think it's really true because there's a number of health benefits for the horse that you get out of green grass. Now, obviously, in certain parts of the world, such as New Zealand or some areas of southern Australia, you can have green grass all year round. Now, you don't have that luxury, so you've got to take advantage of it when you have it, and then allow for nutritional adjustments at other times of the year. So high in protein and amino acids, good source of omega-3 fatty acids, terrific source of vitamin A and E that aren't there in dry grass and aren't there in hay. Vitamin K fits into the same category. And green grass in general is superior to both hay and haylage. And if you've got a lactating mare and you've got green feed, it's amazing how much they can actually eat. They can probably eat 3% of their body weight often. So if they've got the grass there to eat, that's great. They can eat enough to maintain condition, meet their energy needs. If you're having to feed them hay, on the other hand, you've got to keep a lot of hay up to them, and that's one of the mistakes people make. So I've talked about energy supply and the importance of getting that energy supply right, and you can judge energy balance by body weight or body condition. If you have scales, body weight, great, because you can see a change in body weight before you can see a change in body condition. The horse that's in a positive energy balance will gain weight, and negative energy balance will lose it, obviously. Now, there's two types of condition scoring systems that are used. Obviously, in the US, you're going to use the Texas A&M 1-9 one, and you can use that as a basis for adjusting your grain and forage intake to try and keep the horse in the desired condition. In Australia, we've got a number of people who use the 0-5 system with half points. I think this is superior because I actually invented it. back a few years back in the 80s. So I think this is a great system, but you will know the 1 to 9 system here. And it's a really good guide to changes in the horse's energy balance that can have an impact on their productivity. And putting a number on it really means that you're going to do it more seriously than just having a look at the horse and, oh yes, I've this is losing weight or gaining weight. So, ideal condition for many horses on the farm is probably 5, in the 5, maybe 5.5. We certainly don't want too many getting up to 7, and we don't want them getting down to 3s. So, you're trying to keep them in the ideal range. What happens with thin mares? What are we seeing there? And this is body condition score less than 2. I've got this slide done for Australia, so we'll say that's body condition score less than 3 on your system, so probably less than 3.5 really. They can have longer gestation, disrupted cycles after foaling, or if they're empty mares, and a lower pregnancy rate at both 30 and 90 days. If you've got a mare with a foal on her and the mare's losing weight, or they're very thin, milk production will be reduced because they just don't have the fat reserves to put into supporting milk production. So you've got a number of negative things related to thin mares. On the other hand, the fat late pregnant mare presents a number of problems too, and I've mentioned some of these already. There is no big effect on the size of the foal or the growth rate of the foal by getting your mare fat, although there perhaps are some benefits on maiden mares, maiden foalers, keeping them a little bit heavier for their first foal, maybe a benefit, but you certainly can get more difficult foaling. You'll get more angular limb deformities and flexural deformities, so you've got more times with foals locked up. It's bad for them. And risks of laminitis related to insulin dysregulation. Now, if you've got pasture like this on a farm in Australia, then that's really, that's often a challenge to keep mares from getting too heavy. Yeah, getting your mare fat in late pregnancy, whilst it might look pretty, isn't a great thing for the foal inside the mare or the mare herself. So research showing reduced insulin sensitivity in the mare and the foal, reductions even in immunoglobulin levels in the colostrum, and no beneficial or effects on subsequent fertility. So we want mares in this sort of 5 to 7 range. Sorry about the 3 to 4, the Australian terminology there. So what about the research showing obesity, the impact of obesity on reproduction? And you notice a number of the pictures I have there come from India, and sometimes you get sort of extremes in body condition over there. Indian farms have done a lot of work there over the years, as well as farms in Australia and New Zealand and Korea, and some in Japan too. So we want a study done where pregnant mares were fed to be in good body condition. This was actually maiden mares. Or fat. So the fat mares were 7 or 8, good body condition 5 or 6. It cost twice as much to feed them to get them in fat condition, but there was no difference in foaling. There was no difference in size of the foal, no difference in any parameter related to fertility after foaling. And I think one of the things these days, we've got more probably good doing mares around. So in Australia, the sort of Danehill line, or the Northern Dancer line, they're often pretty good doing mares and good doing young horses, and you don't have to feed them as much as some of the other sort of lines. So the change in genetics has meant a change in metabolism in the mares that are around, and changes in the rates at which we feed. I mean, the other big change is things like the pasture species and breeding pasture species that are highly productive for dairy cows in particular, and then they're used for horses, and they're just often too high in energy, and so we end up with some really good doing mares if we feed them too much as well. So other studies on obesity, cyclical changes, aberrant cyclical, reduced endometrial health, even lower milk production. What about foal birth weight, body condition of the mare? What are the key factors here? And I think the key factors probably here are parity. Obviously, placental weight is important, so up to 6.5 kilos, there is a relationship between that and foal birth weight. Above that, less relationship is sometimes you get heavy placentas with placentitis and you get lower weights. But the size of the mare and the stallion are important, and the parity. So you can see some of the data that we've got about previous foals and body weight. So, you know, maidens, foals of maidens averaging 51 kilos versus this is a farm in Kentucky that's got quite big mares and heavy foals. You know, older mares 57. Now, we're probably saying 55 might be an average. And one of the things we've done is massive amount of collection of data about growth around the world and done international growth comparisons and found that, you know, in Australia, we're often getting heavier foals than in other areas, and they'll grow faster. And that's related to springtime, where we've got good grass. We don't have the effect of temperature and snow and reduced forage quality, and they can really hammer along. So the birth weight of the foal doesn't seem to be related to the feeding of the mare, gestation length, or racing success, except at the extremes. You get your 45 kilo foals, then maybe those things you wouldn't necessarily be thinking, you know, we're going to win black type races with those horses, but they can certainly win races with your young ones. And your heavier foals, say above 60, have probably got an increased risk of skeletal disease, developmental orthopedic disease, particularly OCD in hocks and stifles. A high birth weight foal, we've got more dystocia, and that often leads to reduced fertility the following year. So some UK data showing mares that had 62 kilo foals and above significantly lower foaling percentage than the following year. And I suspect that would have also been, you know, they will take longer to get in foals. So you've got a mare foaling later, and then eventually she will miss a year sooner, because you need to allow a longer period of time between foaling and fertility. You certainly get more conformational abnormalities with these big, heavy foals, either angular limb deformities or upright. Obviously, the small foals, as I mentioned, lower value. Some of this data that we're collecting, the study that we're doing, looking at relationships between growth and growth of the foal, skeletal disease, yearling sales, and racing performance. And we've done a pilot study in Kentucky, and we're doing more of that in other parts of the world. You can see here that if you look at this, is the size of the foal, first month of life, and we break them up into quartiles. So first quartile, the smallest 25%, second 25 to 50, and then 50 to 75, 75 to 100, fourth quartile. More stakes winners were seen in the second quartile. So we're getting more stakes winners in second quartile in both weight and height, and less OCD in that group. So maybe that's the area to aim for in terms of you're wanting foals more around the middle of the population curve rather than either extreme. So we don't get much OCD in the small foals, but neither are they as good on the track, and certainly they're not going to be as good in the yearling sales. Terrific study done by my colleague Clarissa Brown-Douglas and Joe Pagan in Kentucky about body weight and condition of Kentucky thoroughbred mares and foals with massive numbers. I think they had 5,000 foals. Looking at the data collected by Hallway Feeds and Steve Cadell in the weighing service that they offer there. And they measure body condition score, they weigh them, and they get height. And this is the body condition score of mares, month of the year. And you can see that the body, it goes down. So this is in relation to the month of the year that they foaled. But in all mares, no matter when they're foaling, so the different lines represent different foaling months, with January and May at either extreme. All mares, body condition score drops January and February, and then from March, as they start to get some pasture access, it goes up. So it's not a massive drop, but it does go up, and that also is reflected in body weight as well. So here's the increase from March through April and May as the influence of the pasture kicks in. That has an effect on the foals. So when we look at average daily gain, mares who foaled in January, which is here, the light grey versus, say, the April foalers in black, you can see that in the first 30 days of life, the early foaling mares had lower average daily gains than the later foaling mares. However, when they get to 90 days at 0.2, they gain more weight because the mare's on pasture then, the foal's starting to eat pasture, the mare's milk production goes up and the foal gets a benefit of the pasture. So there's some compensatory growth there in these later foaling mares, but certainly at 6 months of age or 5 months of age, you'll often find that the foal that's born in April will be bigger than the foal that's born in January. By the time they're a 2-year-old, you're probably not going to see much difference, but certainly early on you do. And if you're looking at weanling sales or things like that, then that can have an impact there. So it's important looking at weanlings to look at their age in terms of judging how big they are and whether it's appropriate. So there were real correlations between mare and foal body weight parameters. So foal body weight, body condition score, average daily gain, positively correlated with what the mare, the same things in the mare. So, big mare, big heavy mare had bigger heavy foals. So there's elements of genetics in that, and also environment in terms of milk production, or the factors that mean the mare is big and heavy contribute to that in the foal. Faster growing mares came from mares that were gaining weight. So as mares gain weight, once they get out on pasture, in the middle of and it's not quite as cold in the middle of the breeding season, mares will gain weight then. And genetics, fat mares produce fat foals. So season definitely affects the growth. Winter-born foals smaller at birth, and often the mares lost weight, and foals didn't grow as fast. And now winter-born foals are smaller at birth. Often there's more maidens amongst the winter-born foals because they're often bred earlier, and so that's part of the reason why they are going to be smaller at birth, those January and February foals. Now the foals born early in the season had caught up by about 5 months post-foaling, 5 or 6 months, most of them, not all. Obviously, the foals on the maiden mares haven't caught up at that stage, but if it's a normal sized foal early in the year, it often will. This was a UK study, looked at feeding maiden mares moderate or high grain intakes, initial body condition score 4.6. So the heavily fed group were fed to get their condition score up near 8 at the time of foaling. So they obviously put on 140 kilos in the last 4 months of pregnancy versus 100 kilos. They were heavier mares. There was no difference in the placental area and the fetal fluids there. There was no difference in the birth weight, placental weight, or average daily gain. So we've sort of yet to establish what the ideal body condition score is for maiden foaling mares. If you've got a maiden mare who's thin, still thin, I certainly think you want to get some weight on her. And there may be merit in having a little bit more condition on that maiden mare to help support lactation than you would do in an older mare. This particular study showed one interesting effect is that unfortunately some of the mares got strangled during the study, and they lost, they were sick, they stopped eating, and lost quite a bit of weight, and that really had a big impact on the size of the foals. So I don't get worried about mares in mid to late pregnancy losing a little bit of weight. If they get sick and lose a lot of weight, then that has potential to impact on the size of the foal. But otherwise, the foal is pretty well protected from the sort of vagaries of mare body weight and mare health. I've got ahead of myself on this slide here. So yeah, 50% got strangled. So during mid-pregnancy, and some of them lost, 100 kilos. So and that did have an impact on the placental area and particularly the length of the foal. And it's interesting, in humans, mid-gestation weight loss seems to reduce length, whereas late gestation weight loss will reduce birth weight. I think weighing foals is a good idea. if you don't have a scale for weighing horses, you may be able to do it even using scales for people. If you've somebody that's not too heavy to pick the foal up, and you can. It's a good idea. It's a good tool of the health of the foal. So weighing foals is a good idea, and weighing placentas is a good idea as well. So we've got 3 stages of mare feeding, having talked about that we need to consider. And I suppose I'll put a 4th in there, which is maiden mares need to be treated differently to other dry or empty mares. So apologies if the terminology is different. I guess you might be using empty mares, but we talk about dry mares and wet mares out here. So we're going to start. The easiest situation to feed is the dry or early pregnant mare. So when we're talking about what's happening, mares that are in poor body condition will have longer winter anestrus and a longer follicular phase before we get to that first ovulation. So you're not going to be able to get them in foal early in the season. So that's one reason why you want to get some condition on your mares. Again, body condition score less than 2.5 would be equate to less than 4. So we really want our dry or empty mares in condition score 5 going into the season. And if they're thinner than that, yes, you do need them gaining weight. But if they're condition score 5, you don't have to. So flushing is really only going to benefit the mares. You'll get a benefit from pasture in terms of energy and protein, but if you're trying to cover a mare in February, that's obviously you're not going to have that opportunity. So you've got to do it with other nutrition, with the right amount of concentrate feed of grain and liberal amounts of hay, plenty of hay. And I think one of the we have mares get put under lights here, as well as having the eye patches that give light, but when they're in stables and under lights, one of the mistakes people make is just not feeding the mare enough hay and thinking that 1 or 2 flakes of hay will be enough, when in fact they can eat a lot more than that. So keeping plenty of hay up to the dry mare or the empty mare will keep her in good condition while they're in the stable. Pecking order issues obviously relate to if you've got them in groups and you're feeding them in groups. And that may be the case, and particularly maidens get affected by that. So if you put a maiden mare in with older mares, they'll get belted around and won't get the same access to the feed. So often, if you've got a few maidens, keeping them together it can be important. The earlier they are retired from racing, the easier it is to do your job of getting them in foal early. And one of the reasons you want to try and get them in foal early is that if you can sort of have a January or February foal early in their career, you'll get more foals out of the life of that mare, because eventually you're going to have to miss a year as they get later and later. And particularly if you're selling weanlings or you're selling yearlings early in the season, then age does have an impact on their potential sales. So trying to get that mare in foal early is a good thing. Maidens come with a poor digestive and metabolic efficiency. They've still got that sort of impact of racing and inefficient digestive processes. They're often not, it's been a while since they've been on pasture. They don't graze as often. And certainly if they come in thin condition, in say condition score 4, you want to be getting weight gain. If they come condition score 5, it's not so important. They often need higher energy feed. So oftentimes you need to feed them a bit like a racehorse. So you may find a sort of higher energy racing feed may be useful for this situation. And think seriously about the pecking order effects. First 5 months of pregnancy, the nutrient requirements aren't very different to maintenance, unless, of course, the mare's feeding a foal, when they're very different. So most important part of the ration should be forage, but you still need it to be balanced. And sometimes if they've got adequate amounts of forage, you can do it with a balanced pellet or lower intakes of a concentrate feed. And particularly, I think it's important to not let the mare get too fat at this stage. I think that's one mistake that can happen at this stage of the year. Second half of pregnancy, we need more energy, more protein, more trace minerals. And if you look at this graph on the right of growth of the fetus, you can see that not until sort of about the last 4 months that the fetus, 4 months, the fetus really starts to grow. So that's when the energy and protein requirements increase. But that is a really important time for things like vitamin A, that you won't have in dry hay, you will have added to feed, and you will have added in green grass. So vitamin A and E are important, particularly A, because one of my long-term impacts of vitamin A deficiency during pregnancy can have a long-term impact in growth of the foal. Trace minerals, pay particular attention to trace mineral nutrition because the milk is a poor source of trace minerals, and so you want to have them stored in the fetal liver, and then that can be a decent source of trace minerals for metabolism and growth in the foal once it's on the ground. Energy needs are going to vary during this time. Extra energy needs will vary depending on what time of year it is in the second half of pregnancy and what pasture intake in terms of quality and quantity you have. So there's no one size fits all. And one of the things that's difficult is writing sort of feeding instructions for a feed tag, because the concentrate feed should be to complement the forage, and often you've got really massive differences in forage quality and quantity that mean you have to have significant variations in concentrate intake. Sometimes, if you've got great forage and a good doing mare or an easy keeper, you can just use a balancer pellet at this time. There are certainly farms here that have got that and do it and just feed them 1 kilo a day of a balancer pellet. That's low in calories, but got quite a decent amount of protein, amino acids, and minerals to supply the needs of that mare. Now, you can use the balancer pellet, and then you could top it up with oats or stabilised rice bran or a mixed feed, or you switch to a sort of suitable mare feed. Most feeds for mares are probably going to need about 3 kilos or sort of 7 pounds to say 7 pounds to 11 pounds a day, supply energy and protein and the minerals and vitamins that the mare will need in late pregnancy if they're properly fortified. So if you find that the intakes that you're feeding get below that, then that's where sometimes topping up with a smaller amount of the balancer pellet can be really useful. And so, many of the feeds that you see, if they're sweet feeds, they'll have the balancer in. So the Hallway feeds will have STAM30 included in the feed. And if it's your intake gets below 7 pounds, you've probably got to add a little bit of the STAM30 on top of that to top dress it to make sure you meet the nutrient needs. Now, you can ask your feed company or your nutritionist to do the calculations, and that's a better way of doing it than my rules of thumb, but that's probably a general guide that you could follow in terms of when intakes get low. Either you switch to a product that's more fortified, or you top up with a balancer. One of the important nutrients in late pregnancy is selenium. Areas of the US are selenium deficient areas have got excessive amounts of selenium. I think in your part of the world, you're in not too bad a shape. It's an important antioxidant with big roles in immunity, in reproduction, and selenium deficiency can lead to white muscle disease in the foals, but also changes in immune transfer. You get varying levels in forages. You can test that, and varying levels in natural and premixed feeds. So it's something that we always consider, the selenium intake of the mare and the young horse. Study done in Kentucky looking at supplementation with either 1 milligram or 3 milligrams of selenium per day. The higher selenium intake led to increased levels in the colostrum, but no change in the colostral IgG levels. However, it did lead to a significant increase in the serum of the foal, and that's what actually matters, what level you get in the serum of the foal. There is thoughts that selenium or selenium deficiency in cattle can lead to an increased incidence of retained fetal membrane. That didn't happen in this study, but it was a relatively small study in terms of horses. So many areas and products will have low levels of selenium. So that's one of the, looking at selenium intake of your late pregnant mares is something that's important. Vitamin E is another antioxidant that works hand in hand with selenium, and some studies here that have been done in England and the US looking at giving vitamin E. So by giving 1,600 international units of vitamin E compared to 800 led to increased IgG levels in both the mare and the colostrum and in the foal, so beneficial effect. And that will be particularly important in the mare who's foaling early in the year, who doesn't have access to green grass. So paying particular attention to your early foalers before they get some green feed. Once they get green feed and the mare gets into it, the vitamin E intakes go up dramatically. Now, one of the other supplements that we've looked at in recent years for horses is that has a number of benefits is omega-3 fatty acids. And this is sort of a complicated area to understand, but I'll try and explain some of the benefits and how you might get some of these. I've got a table here that's a complicated table showing metabolism of omega-3 and 6 fatty acids. And basically what we're looking for is we're wanting more of them on the green side of the equation. So we get alpha-linoleic acid, omega-3 fatty acids, which is metabolized to 20 carbon EPA and 22 carbon DHA, and they tend to have anti-inflammatory effects. So they'll have anti-inflammatory effects. They've also been shown to have some positive effects on bone and some other really beneficial areas. But what we're looking at here is simplifying it, is this potential anti-inflammatory effects. Now, studies in horses done with supplementing with long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, that's the EPA and the DHA, that you only get from fish oil, you don't get from other oil sources, has shown a number of benefits. And this is in a range of species, but improved ovulation rate, blocking prostaglandin release, so we get better embryo implantation and therefore reduced early embryonic loss, improved blood flow to the placenta, improvements in omega-3 fatty acids levels in the fetus, encouraging normal growth and development, and impact on, say, coordination and immune competence. So there's some real benefits out there. This is from studies in a number of species, humans and some other animals, from supplementation of these omega-3 fatty acids. Now, in the diet, in our diet, in the horse diet, we've got both omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. Now, the oils are the best sources of these, although we do get them in grass. And one thing, in green grass, we get quite nice levels of omega-3 fatty acids, the short-chain omega-3 fatty acids. But the oils that we add to horse diets, which is usually we're adding for energy, can have an impact on omega-3 and 6 intake. So corn oil, great palatable oil, good source of energy, high levels of omega-6, low levels of omega-3. On the other hand, linseed or flax oil has low 6 and high 3 levels. Same amount of energy, doesn't last for as long and not perhaps quite as palatable as corn oil, but has got higher levels of these omega-3 fatty acids. You may think that's beneficial, but there is a bit of a catch, as the source of the omega-3 fatty acids makes a massive difference on the outcome. The high levels of the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids that really do the work, the EPA and the DHA, you're only going to get from fish oil. So some of the research that's been done in supplementation of DHA and EPA, so this is coming from fish oil or fish oil derivatives. We can increase levels in the endometrium. We can change gene expression. We can improve biopsies, reduce post-breeding inflammation, change progesterone levels, and in a post-foaling mare, improve ovarian blood flow and get faster involution of the gravid horn, which can help you then get that mare back in foal quicker. That's got to be a benefit. So there's a number of fertility-related benefits from supplementation of DHA and EPA. So this anti-inflammatory effect, I think, is useful in mares that are prone to early embryonic loss or prone to placentitis or fetal loss. And also, if you give prior to foaling, you'll influence the fatty acid content of the milk, and that can have a positive effect on the foal. But you need the fish oil. Green grasses effect is useful, but there's a bit of a roadblock at metabolism from the short chain 18 carbon omega-3 fatty acids to the 20 and 22 carbon ones. And you certainly don't get the same benefit from vegetable oils. Now, we've been doing study this area for a number of years, and there's been some other studies at other universities in the US that have shown that you get different effects from flax oil to what you get from fish oil. So if we, and this is a recent study where we've given the fish oil versus flax oil. These were horses in training. We had 13 horses, 7 got the fish oil, they got 45 mils, 23 mils of flax oil, and they were given it for 60 days. And we did it in that way so that we were sort of equalising the intake of omega-3s. And on the left-hand side, the fish oil group, most of the omega-3s it was getting was EPA and DHA, which is in sort of green and brown, whereas on the right side, the flax oil group was getting the 18 carbon alpha-linolenic acid. So different forms of omega-3 fatty acids, and the theory is that the blue omega-3 fatty acids will be metabolized to get you to the EPA and DHA that you're seeing on the left-hand side. Well, that's the theory, but this study, as others have shown, shows that it didn't actually have an impact. So when we measured the levels of EPA and DHA in red blood cells, we've seen that in the group that got the fish oil receiving the direct supplementation of EPA and DHA, and that's what we want happening. We want increased levels in tissue. We got significant increases of both of them, and yet that's in the purple bars, yet the red bars there, no change in levels coming from the supplementation of the flax oil. So that's some new data that really confirms some studies that have been done in Colorado and Florida, showing that if you want to get increased blood and tissue levels of EPA and DHA, then you really need to have fish oil. Now, I'm not saying every mare needs to have fish oil before she's bred, but I think if you've got mares that are prone to early embryonic loss, prone to placentitis, I think there's a benefit there. And if you want to read about this sort of stuff and get an explanation that's much easier to understand than my explanation there, Equinews is a great resource. You can search, you can sign up for the newsletter that we have, the fortnightly newsletter. And here's just an article that came out. I did a similar talk in Australia back before the breeding season, and this one came out talking about omega-3 fatty acids and the benefits for mares. So look at equinews.com, or you can get to it off our website and go to the library section. Is a great resource for you in a whole host of areas about knowledge about nutrition, about health, and so on. So what happens in the last month before foaling? Mares eat less. They've got this big foal inside them that compresses, reduces their intestinal tract capacity, so they eat less, and the digestibility of the feed is reduced. So, sometimes you might need to increase the amount of feed that you're feeding at that stage. And also, if you're generally going to have a big increase in the amount of concentrate feed you feed after foaling. So this is a good time to acclimatise the mare to the higher levels of concentrate. They don't get a massive increase in body weight because they eat less. But protein requirements increase this time, so good idea if you had a mare in a box and you were just feeding a grass hay, then perhaps adding some more alfalfa hay at this time would be useful. If you've got, or if you've got a mare out in a paddock and they've got the dry pasture, the dry winter pasture, then yeah, they may be able to get some dry matter from that, but some more alfalfa would be beneficial. And you're wanting to adjust them to the diet you're going to feed them after foaling. So the key factors in late pregnancy: adjust the concentrate to the forage supply, so you maintain the horse in the mare in the condition you want. Trace minerals, particularly copper, zinc and manganese, are vital to build the liver storage. liver stores in the last few months of pregnancy. Vitamin E that you'll get from green grass, or you won't, depending on the time of the year. And vitamin A, important for immune transfer and foal growth of the foal, and also selenium may boost immune transfer. So be aware of intakes of those. Look at the calculations about intakes and adjust your feed or supplement program accordingly. And consider in problem mares, look at the benefits of fish oil-based omega-3 fatty acids. Now, what about the lactating mare? The key thing here is not to underfeed the mare. So whilst it's easy to overfeed the mare in early pregnancy, if she's an empty mare, it's also easy to underfeed the lactating mare, because they have massive increases in their requirements for energy, for protein, for amino acids, all around making milk. And mares these days can probably make about 3% of their body weight, sometimes more than that in milk. So you've got your 1,100, 1,200 pound mare. She's making large amounts of milk per day, and that really means that their energy requirements double. And if you don't feed them enough, they'll lose weight, and that's some significant consequences on reproductive efficiency and also on the growth rates of the foal. Here's some data about nutrient needs of the mare. I've got this in megajoules, which is the unit we tend to use in Australia, rather than megacalories. So you divide that roughly by about 4.2. But the numbers are not important, but the trends and the differences are what are important. So in late pregnancy to early pregnancy, we might get like about a 25% increase in energy requirements, maybe 40% in protein and lysine requirements. But when we go to early lactation, we've then got a much bigger increase. So 50% increase from late pregnancy to early lactation in energy, and 70% or more in protein, and an even bigger increase in lysine requirements. So getting the intake of those nutrients right will ensure that your mare will produce milk, she won't lose weight, so she'll be as reproductively efficient as she can be, and you'll have a healthy growing foal. Late lactation, they tend to drop down. The nutrient requirements of the mare drops down because she doesn't make as much milk. But if you're feeding her in a way in which the foal eats, then the foal will start to eat some of the mare's feed. So often, even though the mare needs less feed, the foal sharing the feed bin, and so they might be eating 25% of that feed. So you've got to keep that up. That's the sort of early creep feed. The sort of mares that need extra energy are the winter and summer foaling mares. So at either end of the season, because they're going to get less from the forage, and those mares can often need massive amounts of hay. So you may need to feed. We've had a drought over here for the last few years, and there was one farm was feeding a bale of alfalfa hay, which is like 55-pound bales, good-sized bale of alfalfa hay to a mare and a foal, and 11 pounds of concentrate per day. That's what they were allowing. And there was nothing on the ground. So ad-lib forage is really ideal. And when you've got a mare in stables or perhaps locked up in yards, if they're locked up because of foal leg reasons, and or your foals had been bridged and the mare has to be in the stables to keep the foal from in a post-surgical situation, then keeping the hay intake to ad lib is the safest way of doing it. So we've got massive increases in needs re milk production. Obviously, luckily, we've got a big increase in appetite as well. And one of the things, the trick here is, we want the mare back in foal on the first cover. Otherwise, we lose time, and eventually, sooner rather than later, we're going to have to miss a year because we'll end up with getting the mare in foal too late. So lots of high-quality forage is really vital, high concentrate intakes, and high energy intakes. Remember, meal size is important. Lactating mares are prone to colic anyway, more prone to colic, large colon issues in particular, large colon volvulus. So, and that can be influenced by too big a meals grains that should be processed aren't processed, so they end up disturbing the hindgut. So keeping your meal size down to safe levels may mean that you've got to feed your lactating mare 3 times a day. Or perhaps using what we do here is mixing chaff. So chopped forage mixed in with the grain will slow down the intake of the grain and maybe mean that you can have a larger feed and be a little safer in terms of rapid intake. So you want to avoid major weight loss. That's your key thing. So if you've got good pasture, you may only need a balancer. Pellet. There are mares in New Zealand who, with good pasture, that's all they get. They get a balanced pellet, 2 pounds a day. But early and late in the season, as pasture changes, you'll need more concentrates. Not every mare can be fed the same. And the beauty of, in Australia, our mares are kept in groups in the paddock, except in the areas, after foaling, where you might have a mare isolated or on her own for a sort of week or 10 days after foaling to get the foal's legs strong enough before it can go out, and they can be fed individually then. But in your situation, you've got more ability to feed mares individually, and that means you can vary things. The old mare, the big milking mare, or the maiden mare may need more feed than the mare in sort of prime condition. One of the things, by feeding the mare where the foal's sharing the feed bin, you reduce the weaning setback if the foal's used to the feed it's on before weaning. So things avoiding weight loss here. Mares will draw on their reserves to maintain milk production, and I think if they're losing about more than say 20 kilos a month, you'll see an effect on foal growth rate as well as the effect on reduced reproductive efficiency. So body condition scoring can help you monitor that and can help you monitor weight loss. One of the nutrients that has been some recent research on is amino acid arginine, and some studies in other animals have led to some studies in horses. So we got a study giving 100 grams of arginine for 3 weeks before foaling, led to reduced fluid accumulation after foaling, related to improved blood flow in the uterus. So another study looking at the same thing. We had reduced fluid accumulation, but no effect on fluid clearance time or blood flow. So there's been some conflicting work. So two different studies. If you've got mares that are prone to fluid accumulation after foaling, then maybe this is worth thinking about as a supplement. You would need to give the arginine as a supplement. Here's another group. They're giving 75 grams of arginine this time, and that's quite a bit of powder, so it's a bit of a hassle. From day 15 to 45, led to increased embryo size in the arginine mares at day 40. So there was, despite there being no difference when the supplementation was started. And giving it in late pregnancy increased foal birth weight. So if you had a maiden mare or perhaps a really old mare that you're worried about the size of the foal, maybe this is a supplement that you might consider. So coming to the end of my presentation about mare nutrition and fertility, I think this term straight line nutrition that was coined by friend and colleague Steve Jackson, Kentucky, is a great one. You want to keep the mare in good condition throughout the year. You don't want to get him too thin. You don't want to get him too fat. Mares are going to have a condition that they gravitate to. So some mares will be heavier than others, but keeping them in that is ideal. Most maiden mares will need to gain weight, and you'll get a benefit by having more time to get them to gain weight before you breed them. But there's often pressure to get the maiden mares bred early in the season, particularly where you've got a busy stallion. So we get a lot of maiden mares foaling in August because they're bred in early September. If you can wait a little bit, you might get a better foal that year, but then you'll get less foals in the mare's lifetime. You've got to be really careful between massive, when the mare stops eating or gets sick during pregnancy. But luckily, the foal's often protected from the impact of sort of lower levels of weight loss. And really important to avoid weight loss after foaling, and that's where increased concentrate feed, intake of the right sort of feed. You're always going to pick a feed that's designed for mares. And maybe you need to supplement that at times with higher energy sources if you've got a mare, rather than increasing the feed, and adequate amounts of good enough forage. Grazing, don't underestimate the value of grazing, but in your part of the world, that's certainly a challenge for a number of months, so we're lucky here. Trace minerals really important in late pregnancy, particular attention to getting that trace mineral intake right, and thinking about antioxidants before foaling. And finally, in terms of supplementation, special needs scenario is omega-3 fatty acids could be beneficial for difficult mares. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'm be happy to answer them, or Katie Young, who's in the US, can contribute as well. Katie's taken her muting off. So thank you. Sharon or Megan, are you going to do the questioning?
Before we go to questions, Dr. Young, did you have anything you wanted to offer from the US perspective?
You know, in the US, everything that Dr. Huntington, Peter talked about is absolutely applicable. However, I do want to mention, I do take a little bit of a different turn on body condition scoring, as I was at Texas A&M, where the Henneke system was developed. So I do tend to skew that way. And I think in the States, we do use that's the most familiar body condition scoring system. But I also wanted to mention that KER works with feed manufacturers all over the world, and there are several in the US that are partners, and several options for various products and supplements available through KER and the partners. And so if anybody is trying to figure out which feeds, which supplements would work best for their horses, wherever they are, and I know the audience is primarily in the Indiana area, but Kentucky and down in Florida, where a lot of the racetrack folks also have horses. There, we've got some great partners, and one of the best ways to get some help would be to contact us. It's a great website name, really easy to remember, KER.com. So if anybody has questions, we're more than happy to help you figure out what the best feeding plans for your mares and babies are. So that's it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So far, we've got 2 questions. I'll read the first one, and either one of you or both can answer. The first question was, so the time of year they are born makes a difference in their size at 90 days?
Yes, definitely. Definitely does, because and really it's the amount of grass that the mare's had access to that will be the key factor in that. Now, it may not be a difference by 290 days, but it will be a difference often at 90 days. So that's a key consideration. Now, you go early in the year, you get small foals. But foals born later in the year seem to have more OCDs, particularly hock and stifle OCDs. So you're seeing that in the April-born foals or the May-born foals, and they're bigger at birth. So they may be look better foals, but you've got more wastage opportunities.
Okay. Another question that we received, does the omega-3 work as an anti-inflammatory for studs as well?
Well, okay, so the question, I presume that refers to stallions. So the anti-inflammatory effects are not necessarily what you would expect, although there would be some moderate anti-inflammatory effects. So if you've got a stallion with joint issues, then feeding the fish oil can have impacts. So if you had with joint issues, an older stallion was perhaps having a little bit of trouble getting on the mare related to joint problems, I'd be thinking about supplement, a specific joint supplement as well as the fish oil. So we have one hyaluronic acid supplement that a number of people have fed to stallions with positive effects, Synovate. But if you've got a subfertile horse, then yeah, giving the fish oil is some good research showing benefits on sperm production and motility in subfertile horses, and that's one of the supplements that people use to feed to stallions. And so I'd be thinking particularly, you know, anything that's perhaps getting older or subfertile, I'd be looking at the fish oil for its fertility benefits. The other supplements could be useful there to consider are vitamin E. If the feed doesn't have a lot of vitamin E, particularly early in the year, so we've got a nano-dispersed natural vitamin E that's used as a stallion supplement, and the latest one is coenzyme Q10. So again, for subfertile horses, there's some nice data about that, improving motility and viability of sperm. So there's a few things to think about.
Okay, another question that we have, this person would like to know, rice bran versus ground flax. What are your thoughts on that?
Do you want to answer that one, Katie?
Sure. You know, they are both good sources of fat and calories in a horse's diet. You tend to maybe sometimes use them for different issues. Ground flax is a good source of omega-3 fatty acids, although they are not, they're not as metabolizable, usable as the fish oil omega-3s. Again, rice bran is an excellent source of extra calories. It's a high fat source, and it tends to be pretty palatable. And there are several excellent rice bran products available in the States. OBS down in Florida has a nice rice bran product called Radiant Supplement. And there's another one down for Legends has a good rice bran supplement. I will say one of the things to really think about on the rice bran, you want stabilized rice bran so that it does not go rancid quickly. And you also want to make sure that the rice bran supplement has a balanced calcium phosphorus ratio, because straight natural rice bran tends to be very high in phosphorus and low in calcium, which is an inverted ratio that can be problematic in horses. So the supplements that I mentioned actually, I also have in the Indiana, Kentucky area, Hallway also has a good supplement, and all three are called Luminance, and all three of those rice bran supplements I mentioned do have appropriate calcium phosphorus ratios.
The other thing there, Katie, that's good you mentioned all of those products, but I think pelleted rice bran is more palatable, and you end up getting more into the horse. You know, feeding powdery ground flax, you're just not going to feed as much, so you're not going to get as much energy as you would with the stabilized rice bran in a pelleted form, and so it's going to have a bigger impact, because you get more, you get higher intakes.
Okay, the next question is, I add iron to the mare's diet during the last month of pregnancy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, iron, I wouldn't be adding iron specifically. Sometimes we have it as a nutrient, but I think there's often, we don't really know that much about the iron requirements of horses, but there's more thoughts that they're getting large amounts of iron in the forages, and iron is added in the vitamin mineral premix in most of the feed. So I certainly wouldn't be adding iron, extra iron, and there are some people that are actually trying to cut the iron out. Yeah, forages, most forages have quite high levels of iron. Sometimes they got more than we want. So I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't be adding it.
Okay, we've got another question. Why is the Australian breeding season in the fall as opposed to the late winter spring in the United States?
Well, that's it. It's actually not. It's in the spring. So it's our spring. So we would, mares start foaling August the 1st is the first foaling date. The breeding sheds open September 1. And in the thoroughbred world, in the commercial world, foals are born. We don't get many December foals, so it's very much springtime breeding, and it's a really compressed season. So we got 1 month left of foaling, so we got plenty of August foals, September and October, and then November foals. Our yearling sales start in January. And so we've had the Magic Millions, that was in mid-January, then there's one in New Zealand, and then the sort of third yearling sale of the year starting. So they're not as old as, say, American yearlings are. Now, our 2-year-old racing starts about October of the year, and we've got a massive emphasis on 2-year-old racing. So early maturity is very important over here.
Okay. We have people saying, thank you for such a wonderful educational presentation. I enjoyed it immensely. Are there any closing thoughts that either of you would like to offer before we ask for any more questions? And if there are no more questions after your closing comments, then we'd like to close the webinar.
Okay, thanks. I think if you want more information, Katie mentioned the website and the libraries there. It's a fantastic library. There are tens of thousands of articles that are really well written and easy to understand, talking about important topics or latest research about things, and you can search there. Sign up for the newsletter. It comes every Wednesday, I think, and you can get a quick look at the article topics and decide whether to read them or not read them. Or you can email us at, I think it's info@kr.com as advice. So don't be afraid to ask for advice, get professional advice from qualified nutritionists, and that can help you feed your horses better on your farm and have better productivity.
Dr. Young, do you have any closing comments or thoughts?
I think Peter covered it all. Just once again, we have resources all over the world. So KER.com is a great place to go to get any questions answered.
Okay, perfect. Megan, do you have anything that you want to add?
No, I don't believe so. I just say if anybody has any questions about the Indiana Thoroughbred Alliance, to make sure you check out our Facebook page and our website. We are still accepting members, and we are looking forward to doing some more educational opportunities such as this, and perhaps in partnership with Kentucky Equine Research.
Okay, well, I want to thank Megan so much, because she was not only setting up our Zoom and hosting that, she was watching the Facebook Live presentation at the same time. Dr. Huntington and Dr. Young, we want to thank you so much for presenting. To everybody who joined us tonight, we truly appreciate your participation. We hope this webinar has been beneficial, and good luck with your breeding and equine programs. Thank you so much. We're done for this evening. Have a great evening.